So, I was recently reminded of some of the other dumb stuff that Tim Sweeney has been saying lately, and it kinda sent my brain down a rabbit hole of realizations about why Steam is so beloved, especially compared to other platforms like Tim's own Epic Games, which utterly fails to compete with it. And I thought that that was worth talking about for a hot minute. So, to start with, the specific dumb comment that I was reminded of was Tim bellyaching over Steam having an AI disclosure requirement, arguing that forcing developers to disclose whether they use generative AI in their games can hurt their sales, even going as far as arguing that such a disclosure is somehow irresponsible. And it's like, my guy, if you were selling cakes and then the FDA forced you to disclose that you were making those cakes with human feces, the problem isn't the disclosure. If you legitimately are losing sales because you had to tell the people the truth about how your product was made, maybe you should rethink, what you're using to make your product. After it's not like people just arbitrarily decided to hate AI one day for no reason. Even when there are games that don't disclose their AI generated content, either because they don't launch on Steam or they just ignore the disclosure requirement, which some companies do, people have universally figured it out and admonished the developers for it because universally the AI content is always the worst aspect of these games. Whether we're talking about things like the terrible voice acting in Arc Raiders or the numerous examples of games quote unquote accidentally leaving in AI generated placeholder art, which continues to become less and less believable as an excuse the longer that time goes on. The disclosure is not irresponsible. It's just giving consumers a valid warning ahead of time that the developers couldn't be bothered to pay real people to make a part of their game. If you want this AI disclosure to stop being so stigmatized, then by all means, it's on you to prove it by actually making a game that uses generative AI as a key part of its development process in a productive way that doesn't actively suck. But that's the thing. This isn't really about AI or the AI disclosure or anything. It's just the latest in a long line of consumer-oriented features that Steam has implemented and other companies, for whatever reason, don't. Because that's the thing that's always stood out in the PC gaming market. Steam has been absolutely dominant as a digital platform for buying games for decades at this point, and no other platform has even come close, despite there being numerous attempts with things like EA's Origin, Ubisoft's Uplay, and of course Epic Games. And well, the most obvious reason why these other stores tend to do so much worse is because they tend to include far fewer of the features that people love that Steam has, and what they do include tends to be far worse than whatever Steam offers. I mean, for the longest time, people were making jokes about how the Epic Game Store didn't even have a basic shopping cart to allow you to buy multiple games at the same time. So why is it that all of these companies keep making their stores so much worse than Steam? I mean, it's not exactly rocket science. Steam is right there to use as a reference point. You could just copy their homework, and it's not exactly an issue of funding or resources. Like, yeah, Valve is an extremely successful company. There's no denying that, but these other companies that we're talking about ain't exactly small either. Like, I don't think we can use the excuse that Epic just doesn't have the manpower to make their platform as good as Steam when they own Fortnite, which makes billions of dollars a year or whatever. No, the problem lies with the fact that these companies actively don't want to implement features that actually help the consumer. Or, I guess more accurately, they only want to implement features that will maximize their sale revenue, which will usually run contradictory to the kinds of features that would allow the consumer to make a more informed purchase. For example, I recently heard that Ubisoft was allegedly trying to get Steam to let them block player count data from being publicly accessible. And I know there's a number of other developers that probably share that same opinion, because especially when it comes to things like multiplayer-focused games, that data can allow customers to know if a game is still popular or not. And if a multiplayer game's population is dwindling, then chances are fewer fewer people will buy it. This is why so many companies tend to be so tight-lipped over player counts. Like, unless they think it'll help them, like, you usually don't hear companies talking about how many active players they get per month anymore, outside of, like, earnings calls or whatever. This is why back in the day, Blizzard would actively advertise how many people were playing World of Warcraft or Riot with League of Legends, and we would get that data directly from the developer as part of an advertisement even, because for a while, those were literally the biggest games in the world, and releasing those numbers was a great way to try and get more people to draw in more players, But nothing lasts forever, and eventually those numbers started to dip, and all of a sudden, these companies got a lot more quiet whenever you ask them about player counts. And it's not like nobody plays these games anymore. They're still some of the most popular games in the world, but it still can look bad to see that a game's player counts have gone from like 100 million active users down to 90. And they don't want to deal with that kind of bad press, so naturally they just stopped releasing player data. And of course, when talking about smaller, more common multiplayer games, once their player counts dip down to the low thousands or even hundreds, it can become a lot harder to find good matches, and that can make the game functionally unplayable, especially for a new player who's thinking about buying the game. So having that player count data publicly available lets people be aware of what might happen to their purchase without having to waste their money first to find out in-game. But in my opinion, the best showcase of this kind of difference in mentality and approach is the way that these different stores handle customer reviews, especially if we directly compare Steam, which I personally think has one of the best review systems you could have, to Epic's terrible and honestly kind of manipulative review system. Just to start with the good, there are so many good features in how Steam's reviews work. Of course, anyone who owns a game can leave a review whenever they want, and you can be as detailed and lengthy in your written review as you desire, and it even comes with a bunch of other useful info about the reviewer. Steam displays how much time you spent playing the game before leaving your review, so that you can see how many people, only played for a few minutes, and maybe filter out those reviews to search for people who played it for longer. You can also record the specs of your computer so that people can know how strong your rig is if you have complaints about things like performance and frame rates. Furthermore, there are also charts that show reviews over time, so if a game suddenly gets a huge spike of negative or positive reviews, you can not only see that it happened, but you can also filter reviews by that date specifically to actually see what people were talking about at the time to cause that spike. Hell, you can even review other people's reviews to say how helpful they were and leave comments on them and have a whole discussion. Or you can even label certain reviews as funny so that people know that they're more of a joke and not really to take it so seriously. The point that I'm getting at is that overall, Steam's review system is incredibly in-depth. It provides all of the tools that you can imagine to help a customer make an informed purchase. The only real downside, if you even want to call it that, is that the only scores you're allowed to give is a basic thumbs up recommendation or a thumbs down anti-recommend. But this is really meant to be an aggregate review system anyway, so you can always be as detailed as you want in the review itself. Plus, I always felt that there is kind of a problem with using stars or, X out of 10 style review systems because people might disagree on what each individual number actually means. A middle-of-the-road game might be a 7 out of 10 in one person's book, but a 5 out of 10 in another. So even though two different people might have a same opinion about a game, thinking that it is of equal quality to each other, they still might end up giving it a completely different rating because they interpret the numbers differently. Whereas I think that simplifying things to the simple binary recommendation or I don't recommend system helps make things at least a little bit more consistent in that regard. So overall, Steam is incredibly informative, detailed, and tries to give the customer all of the information that you could possibly ask for. And by comparison, Epic's system is a bit lacking. So I actually made a video about Epic's review system a couple years ago when it first came out, and from what I can find, it has not been changed or updated meaningfully in that time. As of the time of recording at least, their website's FAQ still links to the same blog post that they posted when they first announced this review system, so I don't think there have really been any updates that I can find, according to the app. And this is a problem because Epic's review system is quite literally rigged. I, of course, cannot say for certain if they did this on purpose, or if it was just a happy accident due to how it was designed, but well, let me explain. The way that Epic handles reviews is a bit annoying, to say the least. Unlike Steam, you can't just leave a review whenever you want. You have to be granted the honor of leaving a review. Every time you play a game on Epic, when you finish your play session, there is a random chance that you might get a pop-up asking if you want to leave a review for the game you just played. And from what I can tell, this is the only way to be able to leave a review at all. If you don't get randomly selected, then you don't get to leave your thoughts for anyone else. And then on top of that, even if you do get picked, all you're able to do is leave a rating out of 5 stars and then apply a few random generic pre-written tags to the game. So, if you liked the boss battles or you think the game is good for younger audience, then there's a button for that, and you just hit the button, and that's literally your entire review. If you have any more nuanced or detailed thoughts about the game, nope, you don't get to write a review yourself. You just get to hit a couple of tags, and that's it. And I wish I could go on, but that's pretty much the entire list of features. As a customer using the store, you get nothing else to go off of. Just a rating out of 5 stars, some generic tags, and nothing else. No nuanced thoughts talking about how people like or dislike different aspects of the game. No discussions back and forth. No info about playtime or how the review score has changed over time or anything like that. And of course, the reason why they designed it this way was explicitly to try and avoid the quote-unquote problem of review bombs, because naturally, if a game gets a sudden flood of negative reviews, then that might hurt sales. It doesn't matter if, they might deserve said feedback because, say, the developer put out an update that broke the game or something, or even that customers might just want to warn people about a specific issue with a game that they might otherwise like. All that matters is that they want to minimize bad reviews so that they can maximize sales. But of course, this is only one facet of the problem, because did you spot what the other issue is? Because like I said, this system is actively designed in such a way that it naturally biases its reviews towards people that will give each game a higher score. Because think about it, if you are selected to leave a review at random, but the prompt only has a chance of appearing when you finish a play session with that game, then that means that if you play a game only, say, once or twice, and then you don't like it, so you stop playing it, well then your odds of being selected to leave a review are extremely small. But if you play a game repeatedly, over and over, across dozens, if not hundreds, of play sessions, well then you get a lot more chances to be prompted to leave a review. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll leave a positive review when you do eventually get picked, but at the very least, the system clearly biases itself towards players who have played a game for longer. And it's not exactly a huge leap of logic to suggest that people who play games for longer are more likely to have done so because they enjoyed the game, and thus they are more likely to leave a positive review. Oh, and, just to cap it all off, I don't think you can even change your review after the fact. So if your opinion on a game changes, like I said, for example, if a dev puts out a bad update that breaks the game or something, or maybe just the ending is just straight up bad, you can't go back and update your review to reflect your changing thoughts. And if you don't leave a review when you're prompted to do so, well, then you might never get prompted to do so again. So it's kind of forcing players to make a snap judgment on a game that they just finished playing that they cannot change later, which I think, when combined with all the other factors I already laid out, only further reinforces that bias towards getting people to leave positive reviews without being able to tell any kind of depth or nuance to whatever they're trying to say. So yeah, like I said at the start, the issue with these companies is not that something stupid like disclosing how a game was made is somehow irresponsible, or that a better, more customer-friendly review system is just completely impossible for a multi-billion-dollar corporation to implement. It's that they don't want to implement features that they think might lose them any amount of potential sales. I mean, hell, if you want actual proof of this, we can use Epic's own Unreal Engine asset store as evidence against themselves, because despite literally being part of the same application as the game store, the Unreal store has had way better features for years. You know, you can actually review assets that you buy whenever you want without having to jump through hoops with this weird lottery system, and you can write lengthy descriptions and sort through the reviews however you want. You know, it's not as fully featured as Steam is, but it's at least leaps and bounds better than the Epic Games side of the app. I mean, hell, they even had a shopping cart for years before they implemented it for the other side of the app. So why is this developer storefront being handled so much better than the consumer-facing gaming one? Well, Epic has outright stated on numerous occasions that they care more about developers. They want to try and entice developers to use their storefront. And I think in a broader sense, I think that they just want people making games to use their game engine, the Unreal Engine, and their asset stores so that they have more content to put on their store and thus more games to compete with Steam. I mean, hell, even if you list an Unreal game on Steam instead of Epic, Epic still gets a cut of your profits just for using the Unreal Engine, at least, you know, after a certain amount of revenue. It's a whole thing. But the point is that they have every incentive to be as nice to developers as possible so that they can get a piece of their revenue when their game does well. And I mean, I'm not even saying that that's a bad business practice or anything. That's pretty standard across the industry, but at least it does explain the difference in their decision-making when it comes to designing these two different yet related storefronts. Ultimately, it all ties back to a very short-sighted profit motive. They are kinder to developers and have a better review system and a more customer-friendly storefront for developers because they want them to make games that they can take a cut from. Meanwhile, they put in this draconian review system for, you know, players using their game store and oppose things like AI disclosures because they treat those as aspects that might turn away their potential customers and thus lose them money. If we were living in an alternate reality where disclosing that you made your game with AI actually increased your sales, or at the very least didn't negatively impact them, then I'm sure Tim would not be making the same complaints as he is here. But, as always, I'm happy to continue the conversation in the comments down below. It really is ironic when you think about it, because, you know, they implement these terrible review systems and complain about disclosures and whatnot because they don't want to risk losing sales. They want to maximize their profit margins, but at the same time, it is actively because of these terribly implemented systems and features that people don't like using their platform in the first place and mostly end up sticking with Steam instead, among other various issues. But for now, if you like the video, make sure to leave me a like and hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content like this in the future. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.